That morning after Jonas's funeral, my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "Pack your bags. You've got 48 hours to leave this house." The words cut deeper than any wound, especially spoken in the very home I had built for my son. I held my tongue, but inside, something shifted. Mercy would have its limits, because hidden among my belongings was an envelope Jonas left behind, and inside it was the one thing Marla never wanted me to find. Do you want to know what was in it, and how it turned the tables on her? Follow my story until the end, and tell me the city you're watching from so I know how far my voice has reached. Rain braided down the stained glass windows of St. Bartholomew's, turning the saints into blurred sentinels. The organ breathed a slow hymn while the pews filled with umbrellas and damp coats. My son's name, Jonas Wycliffe, sat on a brass plate at the head of a polished walnut coffin, and the sound of his name in the pastor's mouth felt like a bell struck underwater. People nodded to me the way folks do around grief, careful, as if sorrow were a skittish animal that might bolt if handled wrong. Candles flickered and the air smelled of wax and wet wool. Mountains wrapped Asheville like a tired arm. Outside, thunder rolled as if the ridge itself cleared its throat. The program said, "Celebration of life," but in the quiet between prayers, it felt more like the slow closing of a door. I kept my hands folded, an old habit from courtrooms and contracts, a way to keep the weather inside from spilling out. It had taken a full minute before I realized I was counting breaths the way Jonas did when he was a boy with a fever, my palm on his back, waiting for each rise to promise the next. Then Marla Duval stood. No one announced her. She moved to the lectern with the certainty of someone who'd already rewritten the rules. Black dress, narrow heels clicking once on the marble step, a widow's veil, but not one teardrop catching the lace. She lifted the microphone, found me with a small, bright smile that never reached her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, as if the church belonged to her too. Jonas and I spoke often about what would happen, how we would move forward as a family. She tapped her program with a manicured finger. "There will be some changes." A murmur rippled through the pews. The pastor blinked, hands hovering over his Bible. Marla continued, words smooth as poured oil. "It's what he wanted. He begged me not to let sentiment keep us from doing what's best. So," her gaze drifted back to me, light as a feather but sharp as a pin, "we'll be handling things in a way that honors his vision." An ant in the second row squeezed my shoulder. I didn't look at her. The organist shifted, setting down a cup of water with a tiny clink. Marla thanked specific people, all on her side of the aisle. When she offered memories, none of them had my fingerprints on them. She forgot the campouts, the busted bike chain, the afternoon he swore he'd never forgive me and did anyway. She spoke of our home, then corrected herself. My home. As though the edit were an afterthought and not a blade. Someone sniffed. Someone else coughed. Heat crawled up the back of my neck but never reached my face. Years teach you where to store the fire. I kept the oath I'd made in the car. No scenes, no fuel, and let her keep talking until even the candles seemed to lean away. After the recessional, the church moved like tidewater into the narthex. Palms met shoulders. Lips pressed cheeks. A floral arrangement tipped and righted itself. Rain ratcheted harder on the glass. I felt each condolence like a page turning in a book I hadn't agreed to read. That's when a man I barely knew leaned in, the kind of neighbor you only recognize in a suit. He smelled faintly of menthol and rain. His voice dropped to a whisper meant to sound helpful and only managed to be brave around the wrong thing. "She said you won't live here much longer." The words found a ledge inside my chest and hung there, dripping. He realized what he'd done, straightened, patted my arm twice, and disappeared into a cluster of umbrellas. The whisper moved ahead of me like fog. I watched it reach a cousin, then a deacon's wife, then an old fishing partner. Their eyes slid to me in a way, the way people look at weather gathering on a horizon. In the hall by the coat racks, Marla laughed, quick and silver. "We'll handle it," she told a woman I didn't recognize. The vowel in "we" stretched like taffy. Jonas didn't want his father burdened. Father, not my name. And not even the step of saying Eldrick, just a roll she'd set aside like a folding chair after a picnic. Out by the doors, the wind shoved rain sideways. I steadied an old friend down the steps, felt his hand shake inside mine, and thought how grief makes age show its teeth. My mind kept returning to that whisper as to a sore tooth. You won't live here much longer. As if belonging were a lease that had lapsed the moment the organ fell silent. As if years of mortgage checks, repairs, coaching Jonas through mistakes both ordinary and spectacular, had been a kind of pleasant fiction we'd all agreed upon and could now retire. The reception was a table of casseroles and polite hunger. Every bite stuck. I said the right things. A man rummaging through the drawer where good phrases are kept. Marla floated past with a plate, then placed it on a chair before it could become hospitality. "We'll need keys for the gardener," she told the pastor, and the pastor, a tender soul, glanced at me as though asking permission to keep breathing. There are moments when a man's life compresses into a single habit. Mine was simple. Listen, memorize, wait. So I listened to her, and memorized who nodded, and waited while the rain let up and started again. A child asked where Uncle Jonas had gone, and someone pointed toward the highest piece of stained glass. I stared at the same pane. It offered no reply. When it was finally over, and the church staff began the quiet industry of endings, collecting programs from pews, straightening hymnals, I walked the aisle alone to touch the wood of the coffin. Not an act of drama, just a small declaration, palm to grain. The walnut held a faint warmth, as if the room couldn't quite bear to let the last of him go cold. "I've got it," I meant to say. The air tasted of candle smoke. The words didn't quite make it out. Outside, the parking lot was a glistening field of puddles, stretch of blue ridge cut from pewter. A blue heron lifted from the river as a hearse door thudded shut. People folded back into their separate lives, the way clouds break and forget they ever shared a sky. I stood under the portico with my coat open and watched the water race the gutters. Grief felt less like a storm than like a season that had just declared itself. I knew enough to recognize that humiliation is never the final word, but it leaves a mark you can trace later, the way old burns declare themselves in winter. On the ride home, the wipers kept a beat I refused to follow. Our street waited under dripping oaks, the house square-shouldered against the gray, porch light on. It looked the same. It never is. Inside my chest, something steadied. There would be time for calls, time for documents, time for facts to do their clean work. For now, it had to be enough to stand upright while the last of the condolences evaporated and the day turned toward evening. And then I heard another guest murmur, words that would haunt me. "She's already talking about the house as if it's hers." The next morning the house felt foreign. The silence didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to her. Sunlight cut across the living room floor, revealing spots on the carpet where Jonas's framed photos had hung just yesterday. A hollow patch on the mantel marked where his navy cap used to rest. She had been swift, too swift. The air was stripped of him, leaving only an empty echo. My hands lingered over the mantel, touching dust where memories had been. Walking into the dining room, the smell of lilies from the funeral still lingered, heavy and suffocating. Marla moved quietly, carrying a box filled with Jonas's books. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to say a word. The message was in the empty walls. Later, neighbors stopped by. Condolences came wrapped in careful tones, eyes darting away as if pity might be contagious. They left food on the porch, murmured short prayers, and slipped away. Through the open window I caught a whisper. "She's the real owner now." The words stung more than I could let on. My face stayed still, but inside something cracked. I had lived in this home for decades, every nail and brick tied to my son's laughter, to my wife's cooking, to our family's life. Now, in a single phrase from a neighbor's lips, I was erased, invisible, unnecessary. By afternoon, Harlan Vexler arrived, his leather briefcase in hand. We gathered in the living room. Marla sat upright, like a queen awaiting her crown. My old friend Obadiah stood in the back, hands folded, eyes on me with quiet sympathy. The will was read, stripped to its bare bones. Jonas had left everything, $30 million in assets, Control of the estate, the family house, to Marla, to me, only personal effects. The phrasing landed like a blade. Personal effects. Keepsakes. Trinkets. That was all I was worth. Marla offered a polished smile to those gathered. Jonas wanted me to carry things forward, she said, her voice steady, rehearsed. Her gaze flicked toward me, sharp and satisfied. Guests nodded, some in genuine support, others because silence was safer. I sat in my corner, words trapped in my throat. My son's life, my sacrifices, the roof I had maintained, the savings I had helped him with, all dissolved with the lawyer's closing line. The will confirmed what the whispers had suggested. I was already gone, even while still breathing. Marla placed her hand on Harlan's arm as if sealing the moment. Thank you, Harlan. Jonas trusted you, and so do I. Her eyes, when they met mine, no longer carried pretense. They shone with victory. The gathering broke apart. Some patted my shoulder, their pity weightless, meaningless. Others avoided me altogether. As I rose, I turned toward the corner where Jonas's armchair always sat, the chair where I had watched him open Christmas gifts as a boy, where he had nursed his first beer with me as a man. The space was bare. It was gone. A chill ran through me, colder than the graveyard air had been the day before. That night stretched on without mercy. Sleep refused to come, and the silence of the house pressed down heavier than the grief itself. Memories clawed their way forward, the long years of raising Jonas, the overtime shifts I worked to keep food on the table, the repairs I made on this very house with my own hands. Every board, every nail felt like a piece of my soul, and yet here I was, lying awake, questioning how it had all come to this. Love for my son lingered in every corner, but it now stood twisted against me, overshadowed by Marla's shadow that spread further each day. At dawn, I wandered into the study, looking for something familiar to hold on to. On the desk sat Jonas's old watch, the one he wore through college and every job interview that followed. Next to it, a small box spilled open with photos, Jonas as a boy, sitting proudly on a bicycle I had saved months to buy, or blowing out candles with frosting on his chin. These fragments of our lives were treasures to me, but when Marla passed through, she stopped, picked up the watch between two fingers, and let it dangle like it was some trinket from a thrift store. Old junk, she said, her tone sharp and dismissive. We don't need clutter here. Her words pierced deeper than I thought possible. I had buried Jonas only days ago, and now the things that proved his life, our life, were being tossed aside like trash. I said nothing, my silence holding back the storm inside. But in that moment, a shift happened within me, a reminder that silence did not mean surrender. Later that week, she announced a memorial gathering in Jonas's honor. I had imagined something simple, something true to who he was, quiet, humble, filled with warmth. Instead, what took place was nothing short of a spectacle. The community hall was draped in gold and silver decorations, chandeliers rented to cast a glittering light over polished tables. It looked less like a memorial and more like a gala, as if Jonas's life was a brand to be marketed rather than honored. Guests arrived in droves, dressed as if for a fundraiser. Marla floated among them, her smile wide, her voice carrying. She toasted to Jonas's memory with a glass of champagne, yet every word dripped with self-promotion. People clapped, murmured admiration, but the essence of who my son truly was, a man of kindness, modesty, hard work, was nowhere to be found. I sat at a table near the back, away from the glow of conversation. No one approached, not really. I was a relic to them now, a shadow fading from the center of the story. Watching Marla sparkle under the lights made my stomach knot. Rage simmered beneath the surface, but I kept my hands folded and my face still. At one point, I caught her gaze, and she drifted over, her perfume heavy, her smile thin. I leaned close enough so only she could hear me and said, steady and low, "Legacy isn't bought with chandeliers." She laughed softly, dismissively, her eyes glinting with victory. "You're powerless here, Eldrick," she whispered back. The words cut deep, but they also clarified something inside me. I could feel the storm shifting. This wasn't just about grief anymore. This was about survival, about dignity. The night wound down, but before it ended, she leaned close once more, her voice cold and deliberate. "You'll be out of this house in 2 days," she murmured. Her ultimatum burned through me long after the lights dimmed and the hall emptied. The battle lines were drawn, and there was no mistaking what was coming next. The morning after Marla's glittering memorial, the house felt colder than ever. Walking down the hallway, the walls seemed stripped of Jonas's spirit. The framed photographs that once told our family's story had vanished overnight, replaced by polished, empty spaces. Even the small shelf where Jonas's high school trophies used to rest was bare, as though he had never lived, never achieved, never breathed in this house. A quiet grief crept through me, accompanied by suspicion. The faint smell of lemon polish filled the air, too clean, too deliberate. My belongings had been pushed into boxes by the stairs, as if I were already a guest overstaying my welcome. When I reached the living room, Marla was waiting. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Standing near Jonas's armchair, my armchair, she announced with a voice sharp enough to cut through stone, "You have 48 hours to leave this house." Her words carried through the room where 2 staff members hovered, dusting as if on cue. Their eyes flicked toward me, then down, pretending not to hear, but I knew they would repeat it before the day ended. My humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was staged, a performance meant to wound. Heat pressed against my chest, but no words came. To plead would be to surrender. To argue would be to give her satisfaction. So I stood there, silent, absorbing the blow, letting her mistake my silence for weakness. My dignity was bruised, but not broken. Later that afternoon, I tried to hold on to the routines that made me feel human. At the grocery store, I reached for my card, swiped it, and felt the sting of rejection when the cashier shook her head. "Declined," she whispered softly, embarrassed for me. I tried another card, same result. The looks from the people in line behind me pierced deeper than the words. With trembling hands, I pulled out a small amount of cash, barely enough for bread and milk. Confused, I went to the bank the next morning. Clinton Ray, a young man who had known me for years, stepped into his office with that careful tone bankers use when they carry bad news. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Mr. Morrow, your accounts have been moved. They're under Marla's authority now. I'm sorry, my hands are tied." The apology in his eyes only deepened the sting. This wasn't eviction. This was erasure, financial, social, personal. I walked out with nothing more than the sound of my shoes echoing against the marble floor, as though the bank itself were pushing me out. That evening, I confronted Marla again. She sat at the dining table, sipping wine from Jonas's old glass as though it had always belonged to her. I told her quietly, "You underestimate me." Her laugh was sharp, dismissive, echoing off the walls of the empty house. "You've got nothing left, Eldrick. Nothing." Inside, anger simmered, but it was no longer wild or uncontrolled. It was restrained, coiled like a spring. She believed she had broken me, that I was finished. But she didn't understand. I had weathered storms longer than she had been alive. I would not leave quietly. When I returned to my room that night, I froze. On the bed sat my old suitcase, zipped and neatly packed. Only it hadn't been my hands that folded those clothes. Someone else had decided it was time. The morning began not with birdsong or the hum of a quiet house, but with the sharp rip of packing tape. That sound cut through the walls like a declaration. My time here was no longer mine. Walking into the hallway, I found my closet already emptied, shirts and jackets folded into boxes labeled with black marker. The drawers I once opened each morning had been gutted. A few picture frames leaned against the wall. Faces of family half hidden under cardboard flaps. The house no longer breathed like Jonas had left it. It was being hollowed out, piece by piece. A strange calm fell over me, one that was less acceptance than disbelief. By midday, the silence outside broke into the scrape of heavy furniture on wood floors. Through the front window, I saw movers, young men with no ties to Jonas or to me, hauling out the old dining table. That table had seen Thanksgiving dinners and birthday cakes, yet now it sat exposed in the driveway as if it were a yard sale item. Neighbors passed by slowly, their eyes darting but their heads turning quickly away, as if pity might be contagious. A few whispered across lawns, their lips moving just enough for me to catch fragments. She's making space. It's her house now. Standing on the porch was Marla, arms crossed, chin high, orchestrating the whole display like it was her parade. Shame flared hot in my chest, the kind that burned deeper because it wasn't just private, it was paraded for all of Asheville to see. I stepped outside, my suitcase dragging across the porch boards. My voice carried louder than I intended, sharp enough to make the movers pause mid-step. "Marla," I said, my throat tight but steady. "You've taken Jonas's house, but not his father's resolve." The air shifted. The neighbors who lingered suddenly leaned closer, waiting for her reply. She didn't hesitate. "Resolve won't pay rent," she said, her words slicing the air with a mocking smile. For a moment, my anger threatened to boil over, but years of holding back, for Jonas, for family, tempered me. Instead of shouting, I locked eyes with her. "Remember this day. You may have money, but you'll never have dignity. And dignity, Marla, lasts longer than wealth." The movers shuffled uncomfortably. A hush fell over the drive. She laughed, brittle and hollow, but her knuckles tightened around the papers she carried. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of boxes and glances I chose not to return. By evening, the driveway was clear of everything that once belonged inside with me. I held a single small suitcase in one hand and a cardboard box in the other, the last remnants of my years in Jonas's house. The porch light flickered on as I walked down the street toward Obadiah Creel's home. Obadiah was a man of few words, a longtime neighbor whose presence had always been steady. He opened the door before I knocked twice, his gaze steady, not pitying. "Come in, Eldrick," he said simply, stepping aside. Inside, the smell of steeping tea filled the air. I sat on his porch for a moment longer before stepping in, letting the humiliation of the day drain slowly, softening into something else, something that almost felt like resilience. As I placed the box on the floor near his table, my hand brushed against something thick wedged between my old journals. An envelope, heavy, sealed, and unfamiliar. I hadn't put it there. A shiver ran through me as the weight of it settled in my palm. Whatever it contained, it wasn't from me, and it wasn't from Marla. Obadiah's kitchen had a way of swallowing sound. The old house creaked every now and then, but otherwise it was quiet, the kind of quiet that could both soothe and unsettle. The lamp on the table cast a golden pool of light across the wood grain. In the middle of it lay the envelope, thick, slightly crumpled, and entirely out of place among my modest pile of keepsakes. It hadn't been mine. That much I knew. I'd gone over my belongings before leaving Jonas's house, making sure only the essentials were with me. A watch, a few photographs, clothes, and the single box I carried out. So who had placed it there, and why? For a long while I didn't move, just sat with it in front of me, hands folded, heart steady, but uncertain. The edge of the paper caught the light, daring me to break the seal. My breath came shallow, and in that moment the kitchen clock ticked louder than it should have, each second daring me to make a choice. Curiosity wrestled with dread. Finally, I slipped a finger under the flap and tore it open. Paper spilled onto the table, deeds, signatures, pages that smelled faintly of ink and time. My eyes caught Jonas's handwriting on the margins of a document. His familiar slant sent a jolt through me, like a voice from beyond the grave. He had written notes, reminders to himself. Finalize transfer. Discuss with Eldrick. Shock stiffened my body. These weren't just scraps of paper. Someone had meant for me to see this, to have this. I spread them out across the table, the edges overlapping like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't yet ready to solve. My gaze traced the lines again and again until the words sank in. Jonas had never completed the transfer of the deed. The house, the very ground Marla strutted over as if it were her throne, still bore my name alongside his. Legally, at least on paper, she did not have absolute control. A surge of heat climbed into my chest, anger mixing with something new, leverage. After weeks of humiliation, of whispers, of being erased, I finally held a card she couldn't see coming. Betrayal still cut deep. Why hadn't Jonas told me this outright? Why keep me in the dark, leaving me to find the truth only when it was nearly too late? But alongside that hurt came a current of strength. I picked up the phone. Harlan Vexler's voice was groggy when he answered, but it steadied quickly once I explained. You're saying the deed still bears your name? His tone sharpened. Yes, I said, laying the papers flat. Jonas never finalized it. The bank records might say otherwise. But the legal trail doesn't lie. There was a pause. Then Harlan exhaled. This changes everything. It won't be easy. You'll face resistance. But you have grounds. Eldrick. Real grounds. The word echoed in my chest. Grounds. For once, the earth wasn't crumbling beneath me. It was firm. Solid. Mine. I thanked him quietly and hung up. The kitchen was silent again, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock. My reflection stared back from the window, an old man who had lost much but not everything. That night, lying on the small cot Obadiah had set up for me, I felt something I hadn't since Jonas's funeral, the calm weight of security. Sleep came easily, and before drifting off, a single thought stayed with me. Marla had no idea what I was holding. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains of Obadiah's rented room, spilling across the envelope I had tucked under my arm the night before. For the first time in weeks, sleep had not been haunted by Marla's voice or the memory of Jonas's casket. Instead, there had been something like relief, thin, fragile, but there. The documents inside that envelope felt like a weapon, or at least a shield, proof that I hadn't been erased from my son's legacy. That hope lasted until Obadiah came in, his boots scuffing against the wood floor, the morning paper folded under his arm. He didn't speak right away, which told me plenty. When he finally laid the paper down next to my coffee, his eyes carried the weight of a man who didn't want to be the messenger. The headline was bold, the kind that grabbed a reader by the throat before the first sip of coffee. Father clings to dead son's wealth. Community questions his integrity. Heat rose in my chest before I could even read further. The article painted me as a bitter old man who had never let Jonas live his own life, a manipulator who had kept a stranglehold on the family finances. By the second paragraph, it claimed I had been meddling with Jonas's estate, scheming to cut Marla out. I set the cup down too hard, coffee splashing onto the table. My hands trembled, not from age, but from fury, to see decades of sacrifice twisted into greed on a printed page. For every neighbor and stranger to devour over breakfast, it was humiliation I wouldn't soon forget. Later that morning, I walked down to the local coffee shop, the one I'd been frequenting since Jonas was a boy. Back then, he used to beg for a muffin while I read the sports page. Those memories felt like ghosts as I stepped inside. Conversations slowed. A man who once shook my hand after church glanced away, pretending to be fascinated by the pastry case. Two women by the window lowered their voices, but not enough. I thought he was better than that, one said. The words cut deep, sharper than Marla's smirk ever could. It was one thing to be robbed by her. It was another to have my community, my people, turn their backs. Obadiah sat with me at a corner table, his presence a small comfort. People believe what they read, he said gently, but you and I both know the truth. I nodded, though the ache in my chest didn't ease. Knowing the truth wasn't enough, not when lies traveled faster, louder, dressed in the armor of print. By midday, I was at Harlan Vexler's office. He leaned back in his chair, the kind of man who had seen too many dirty fights in courtrooms to be shocked easily. Yet even he frowned as he read the clipping I'd brought. "This isn't random," Harlan said, tapping the page. Marla fed this to the press, probably through someone she called a family insider. It's meant to bury your credibility before you can even make a move. The fury I'd felt earlier hardened into something colder, sharper. She thought she could smear my name, erase me not just from Jonas's house, but from the memory of everyone who ever knew us. She underestimated me. I folded the paper, tucking it into my coat pocket with the same care I'd given the envelope. Marla believed she was tightening the noose, but every lie she spread only proved how desperate she was to keep her grip. As I stepped back out into the late afternoon light, the path ahead was clearer than it had been since Jonas's funeral. Marla thought she had buried me under her lies, but she had no idea the truth was already in my hands. The house glowed with warm light, laughter spilling out onto the front lawn as I walked up the steps. For a moment, I thought of turning back, but the envelope tucked under my arm steadied me. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about truth. When I pushed open the door, conversations faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned, murmurs rose, and the cheer that had filled Marla's home thinned into a silence sharp enough to cut. Marla stood near the center, her glass of wine held like a trophy. She had been radiant all week, feeding off her new status and the smear she had spread. But when her eyes met mine, a flicker of something crossed her face. Surprise, maybe even fear, before she smoothed it over with a smile too polished to be real. Well, she said loudly, as if hosting a show. We weren't expecting you tonight. Her voice dripped with false sweetness, and laughter from a few relatives followed. I caught the sideways looks, the whispers. Isn't he the one who tried to control everything? The one the paper wrote about? I didn't move toward her. I just let my gaze sweep the room, calm, unblinking. I came, I said evenly, because truth doesn't stay buried. The words hung heavy, and for the first time that evening, no one seemed eager to meet Marla's eye. She tried to reclaim the stage, gesturing toward the dining table. If you're here to stir trouble, Eldrick, I'd ask you to reconsider. We're celebrating Jonas's memory. Not, I cut her off, not with volume, but with presence. From beneath my arm, I slid the thick envelope and placed it on the polished wood. A hush rippled across the room. Fingers of curiosity stretched forward as I pulled out the papers, spreading them flat so the names, dates, and Jonas's unmistakable handwriting were plain. Gasps fluttered around me like startled birds. These are Jonas's property records, I said, voice steady. Proof he never surrendered this house entirely. His father's name, my name, remains bound to it. Whatever inheritance you claim, Marla, you never had sole control. The silence deepened. Then, like a well-timed cue, Harlan Vexler stepped into view, his voice carrying the weight of law. I've reviewed these documents. They're authentic. Eldrick still holds legal standing. Marla's composure cracked. She lunged toward the table, her words shrill. Forgery. That's what this is. You all can't seriously believe. But her voice wavered. The confidence drained. I didn't need to shout. I didn't even need to defend myself. The family did it for me. Questions erupted like sparks. Why would Jonas hide this? Why didn't you tell us about these papers, Marla? If Eldrick is lying, then why is Harlan backing him up? Eyes turned, no longer at me, but at her. Faces that had been cold to me at the start of the evening now carried doubt, suspicion, even pity. The smear she had painted began to peel, exposing the cracks she couldn't plaster over. I leaned back in my chair, saying nothing more. Vindication didn't need my anger. It needed patience. Let the truth speak. Let the silence work. And as Marla's smile faltered under the weight of questions she couldn't answer, I caught a glance across the table. Someone there, a cousin, an in-law, watched her too intently, their jaw tight as though they carried knowledge they hadn't dared reveal. The room swelled with voices, arguments, shifting loyalties, and in that storm of doubt, I saw it clear. The fight was far from over. Sleep was shallow that night, broken by the echoes of last evening's confrontation. The family gathering had ended in a storm of raised voices and shifting loyalties. But I knew Marla wouldn't retreat. She had too much to lose, and too much venom to spend. Sitting alone in the dim light of my rented room, the envelope of documents rested on the table like a quiet ally. Vindication was close, but it wasn't enough. My gut told me Marla would strike again, harder and faster, before I could steady myself. The morning was crisp, light filtering through blinds onto the worn carpet. I reached for my coffee when the phone rang. The sound startled me. It was rare these days that anyone called. Lifting the receiver, I heard a hesitant voice. "Mr. Morrow, this is Clinton Ray." The name pressed a weight into my chest. Clinton, the banker who had handled Jonas's accounts. A man I'd seen in passing but never truly spoken with. His tone carried unease, like he was already looking over his shoulder. "I shouldn't be calling," he continued, "but I can't watch this any longer. There are things about Marla you need to know, things that weren't meant to come to light." Silence stretched on my end. My pulse quickened, suspicion and hope colliding. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Because I can't keep burying my conscience. If you'll meet me, I can show you." The tremor in his voice made me believe him. We agreed on a discreet spot, a diner just outside town, the kind of place where truckers stopped for eggs and black coffee. That afternoon, I slipped into the booth across from Clinton. He looked younger than I remembered, though worry had carved sharp lines around his eyes. He slid a manila folder across the table, fingers lingering as if reluctant to part with it. "I've been carrying copies of these for weeks," he said. "Couldn't decide if speaking up would cost me my job or worse. But seeing you dragged through the mud in the paper, I couldn't stand by." Inside the folder were bank statements, transfer slips, all stamped official. My eyes scanned the lines, confusion giving way to clarity. Repeated sums had been withdrawn from Jonas's estate account, disguised under management fees and miscellaneous expenses, but the destination account wasn't tied to any official ledger. It was Marla's, hidden beneath layers of false fronts. My chest tightened as the numbers blurred before me. "She's been siphoning funds," I whispered. Clinton nodded. "For months. Even before Jonas's passing, she manipulated signatures and authorizations. I suspect Jonas never realized how deep it went. If this gets out, it's not just a civil matter, it's criminal." The weight of it struck hard. For weeks, I had felt powerless, stripped of dignity, erased from the home I built with my son. Now, in my hands, was proof stronger than whispers or sentiment. A proof that Marla's empire was built on fraud. A swell of righteous anger surged, tempered by a glimmer of hope. This wasn't merely about reclaiming a roof over my head. It was about justice for Jonas, about tearing down the false queen who had paraded on his memory. Clinton leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You need to act quickly. She'll sense someone's against her. These documents, they can turn the tide, but only if you're ready to stand up publicly." I closed the folder with steady hands, feeling the diner's hum fade into silence around me. The chatter of truckers, the clink of cutlery, all dimmed under the gravity of what sat between us. For the first time since Jonas's death, I felt something stronger than grief or anger. I felt purpose. As I walked back into the fading afternoon light, the folder pressed against my chest. One thought rang clear. This battle was no longer about a house or even my pride. It was about exposing the lies that had poisoned my family, and it was about justice Jonas deserved. The morning air outside the Asheville courthouse carried a weight I hadn't felt since Jonas's funeral. The building loomed before me, its old brick and marble steps standing as a reminder that justice wasn't just a word in this town. It was a place where legacies could be defended or destroyed. My hands trembled slightly as I held the folder of documents. They weren't only papers, they were the last chance to prove Jonas's trust in me hadn't been misplaced. Harlan walked beside me, calm as ever, his tie neatly knotted and his briefcase swinging lightly at his side. "Stay steady," he murmured, voice low but firm. "We've got more than enough to show the truth. Clinton's testimony alone could turn the tide. I nodded, though the knot in my chest refused to loosen. Every step up those courthouse stairs felt like dragging years of betrayal behind me. For a moment, I closed my eyes and thought of Jonas, his laugh, his stubborn streak, the long nights we spent working to keep the house afloat. "This is for you, son," I whispered under my breath, before stepping inside. The courtroom buzzed with subdued conversation as people filed into the gallery. Marla was already seated across the aisle, her black dress more suited for a cocktail party than a legal hearing. She smirked when her eyes met mine, the kind of smirk that said she still believed money would cover her tracks. I sat tall, folding my hands on the table, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me waver. When the judge entered, the room quieted. Harlan rose, introducing the matter with steady authority. He laid out the financial trail with precision, each page of evidence placed carefully before the court clerk. Then Clinton took the stand. His voice shook at first, but steadied as he pointed out the series of withdrawals Marla had authorized under the guise of estate management fees. "This account," he said, tapping a highlighted section of the record, "was created just weeks after Jonas's passing. The funds, large sums, over several transfers, were funneled into a private account under Marla Duvall's name." The gallery murmured. I caught Marla stiffen, her hand clutching the edge of the table. For the first time since Jonas's death, her confidence cracked. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering urgently, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Harlan pressed on, his voice unwavering. "Your Honor, these documents reveal not only misconduct, but clear intent to siphon funds illegally from the estate. My client, Mr. Eldrick Morrow, has been smeared publicly as greedy and manipulative. Yet the evidence shows who has truly exploited Jonas's legacy." My heart pounded, each word landing like a hammer driving truth into the room. I glanced toward Marla, whose painted smile was fading into something raw and ugly. Then it happened. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. "This is ridiculous. He's the one who never let go, who controlled Jonas until the very end. He's jealous because Jonas trusted me more than his own father." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even her lawyer tried tugging at her sleeve, urging her to sit, but she yanked her arm free. Her voice climbed higher, venom spilling with every word. "He's old, bitter, and pathetic." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every eye in that room was on her, watching her unravel. For once, silence was my greatest weapon. The judge banged the gavel sharply. "Enough, Ms. Duvall. Sit down immediately." His eyes were hard, his tone sharper still. "Your outburst is not only inappropriate but reveals more than you may realize. This court will not tolerate manipulation or misconduct. A deeper investigation into your financial dealings will be conducted." Marla collapsed back into her chair, cheeks flushed red, chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. The smirk that once seemed unshakable was gone. As the hearing wrapped up, the judge's words still echoed in my ears. "Mr. Morrow, the court acknowledges the gravity of your claims. Ms. Duvall, consider yourself warned. Any attempt to interfere further with this investigation will result in immediate consequences." For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint stirrings of justice. Not victory, not yet, but justice drawing closer, step by slow step. My son's memory hadn't been buried under her lies after all. When the gavel struck, the sound reverberated through my chest. The fight was far from over, but the ground had shifted beneath Marla's feet. Her foundation of deceit was cracking, and she knew it. As we stood to leave, Harlan touched my shoulder. "This was a good day, Eldrick, but brace yourself. She won't go down quietly." I nodded, eyes fixed on the courthouse doors ahead. The morning light spilled through them, brighter than when I'd entered. "I don't need her to go quietly," I said under my breath. "I just need her to go." The rented room was quiet, but the questions in my mind were loud. The courthouse echoes still clung to me, every strike of the gavel carrying its weight long after I'd walked away. Marla's outburst replayed in flashes, her voice cutting through the calm I tried to hold on to. Harlan's steady tone had steadied me then, but alone in that dim room, the choice gnawed at me. Mercy or justice? Which path would Jonas have wanted for me to walk? I sat at the small desk, the lamp throwing a tired circle of light over scattered papers. For all the noise of the day, silence was heavier. There was no undoing the betrayal, but perhaps there was still a way to honor the years Jonas and I had shared. My chest ached with both grief and resolve. The phone rang, sharp against the hush. Harlan's voice came through steady, like a man who had waited long to deliver news. "The foundation board has met," he said. He explained how Jonas's estate had been structured through the Wycliffe Family Foundation. Its oversight triggered once financial misconduct was suspected. "The forfeiture stands," he continued. "They've decided you will have lifetime residence, stewardship of the house, and a role in oversight." "But Marla," he paused, letting the weight build. "She's been offered a conditional lifeline." The conditions were strict: a public apology at the community hall, full cooperation with restitution, 2 years of financial oversight, and above all, respectful conduct toward me. Fail once, and she would be evicted in 72 hours and face civil escalations. Harlan's voice softened. "If she accepts accountability, can you live under the same roof with her?" I breathed deep, the answer clear. "Yes," I said. "Dignity first. That's all I ask." Twilight draped itself across Asheville when I walked up Obadiah's porch. He stood beside me, hands tucked in his suspenders, eyes narrowed at the house across the way. "Place remembers you," he said. I nodded, stepping toward it. Inside, the rooms were caught between past and present. Jonas's face looked back from frames I had saved, now returned to their rightful spots. The renovations Marla had ordered lay half done, tools stacked neatly as Deacon Holt had paused work, awaiting lawful orders. A message from Clinton buzzed on my phone. The estate accounts were frozen until the audits were complete. I carried a single chair into the kitchen, setting it at the table as if planting a flag, a boundary. This house would hold dignity again, or it would hold nothing. Dusk deepened when Marla arrived. She stepped onto the porch, eyes swollen, shoulders drawn small. "I need to speak with you," she said, voice raw. I let her talk. She confessed to pawning Jonas's cufflinks months ago, drowning in a debt tied to reckless speculation. A broker now threatened to expose her unless she paid. She pleaded with me to speak for her to the foundation, to shield her from what was coming. I stayed still, hands folded, listening to every word. When she finished, I spoke quietly, firmly. "You want mercy. Then you will meet the conditions. You will stand before the community and apologize. You will cooperate with restitution. You will accept oversight, and you will not humiliate me again." Her head bobbed, half in agreement, half in calculation. "I can change," she whispered. "Then show it," I answered. I did not offer her money. What I gave was space with terms, a guest house room, not the main house. She would sign oversight papers tonight and apologize tomorrow. Obadiah stood as witness. Deacon confirmed the guest house secured and inventoried. Her hand trembled as she signed, pen scratching like a confession too late. When the ink dried, she asked for a moment on the porch to make a call. I allowed it. Mercy, but with a lock. Moments later, my phone buzzed. Clinton's alert flashed. Attempted $50, $1,000 pull using Jonas's old token, flagged just now. I turned my eyes to the dark porch, where Marla's silhouette whispered into her phone. "Mercy needs a lock." I reached for the key. The dawn came early, slipping through the thin curtains of my rented room, and with it came a heaviness I had not known since the day of Jonas's funeral. Clinton's late-night alert still pulsed in my ears. Her attempt to pull $50,000 from the estate as soon as she thought I'd let down my guard. I replayed the sound of her whisper on the porch, the way she had bent her head and feigned remorse. Mercy had been offered. She had answered it with betrayal. Today would not pass without resolution, for Jonas, for myself. By mid-morning, the community center hall was full. Folding chairs scraped across the floor. neighbors greeting one another with the low hum of expectation. Marla stood at the front, polished and poised, a silk scarf draped around her shoulders as if grief were a costume. This was to be her apology, her last chance. Instead, she launched into performance. "I have suffered," she said, her voice trembling for effect, "slandered by an old man who cannot release control." Some nodded, others shifted uneasily. I sat silent in the back row, the envelope of proof heavy in my lap. When Harlan stepped forward with Clinton at his side, the room seemed to tilt. The lawyer's voice cut through her drama, measured and sure. "This morning, records confirmed an attempted withdrawal using Jonas Wycliffe's old access token at midnight by Mrs. Duval." Clinton's hands shook as he held up the printouts. Gasps moved through the hall like a wave. Marla faltered, her face paling, her polished words slipping into stammers. The mask she had worn for weeks shattered in front of everyone. I rose slowly, the creak of my chair echoing louder than her excuses. For too long I had held my tongue, but silence was no longer mercy, it was surrender. "Family is trust," I said, my voice steady, carrying across the room. "And trust dies the moment it is traded for greed. Mercy without boundaries is not kindness, it is weakness. She has broken every line drawn for her. Today, I withdraw what little shield I offered." A few heads bowed, others nodded firmly. The weight that had clung to me since Jonas's death began to lift. Her words turned shrill, pointing fingers, blaming grief, blaming me, blaming anyone she could. But Harlan was ready. The motion was filed. The judge present at the meeting signed, and Clinton froze the last of her accounts before she could move another dollar. Deacon stood by the door, and when the order was read aloud, he stepped forward without flourish, leading her out under court authority. She shouted until the door closed, and then only silence remained. Justice had no need to raise its voice. It stood on its own. That evening I returned to the house, not hers, not mine alone, but Jonas's legacy preserved. Obadiah walked beside me as I opened the front door. The silence that met me no longer stung. It felt like rest. I set Jonas's photo back on the mantel, the frame cool under my fingers. "Your house is safe," I whispered. The kitchen table stood bare except for a single chair I had placed there the night before, a reminder that boundaries are what keep love from being consumed. To those listening tonight, know this: dignity must be defended, no matter the years behind you. Compassion is holy, but without clear limits, it becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. Mercy may bend, but dignity must never break. That was the lesson she taught me by trying to take everything, and failing.